Hey guys, Sly here, and welcome back to another episode of the Caspian Game Awards. So today we're going to be talking about the year 2008, and well, it's going to be, I guess, an interesting one to talk about. But of course, before we get into that, I do have a couple of announcements. Switch this over first. There we go. So, yes, I know I did not stream yesterday as I promised, but that was because there were some issues going on with my Discord that I wanted to make sure that I can get resolved. So, thankfully, that's all pretty much worked out. And yeah, don't worry, it's not like we got everything like fixed on there. So that should be good. I don't want to get into the specifics for you guys just because of the type of bullshit that was going on. But regardless, that's all fixed. But more importantly, I wanted to also be able to just kind of take my time when it came to this particular year, because I'll get into it a little bit, but it was just kind of a bit of a mess. That being said, as far as pretty much the rest of this week is concerned, tomorrow we'll be starting our next playthrough, so stay tuned for that. And of course, I'll be starting the research on our next tier list episode, so I would definitely recommend you guys stay tuned for that. And if you guys haven't already, of course, as always, hit that follow button down below and turn the bell icon. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button along with the bell icon. And yeah, let's get into this. So, of course, we're going to be talking about 2008. And for those who haven't been watching our series, basically we go through, pretty much the Game Awards from previous years, and we pretty much just make our own Game Awards. So just to kind of make up for the fact that some of them were pretty terrible. And boy, oh boy, we're starting to really get into the cringe fest with this. Like, again, the last, basically month of us talking about the Game Awards has obviously been us talking about the cringier aspects of just the award ceremony show. And, well, yeah, it gets really bad by 2008. Which, unfortunately, though, as much as it pains me to say it, it is unfortunately kind of a telling thing for the year in general, because while I was doing my research, I was trying to see if I could find, pretty much everything in each category, which I did, but I'm gonna be honest, 2008 was it's
not good.
It was actually a pretty bad year as far as I'm concerned. As far as trying to find video games. I'm not gonna lie, this might be the worst year that we're gonna be talking about as far as the 2000s. Cause not to say that it was completely unsalvageable year, don't get it twisted. There were plenty of games that came out in 2008 that were genuinely really good, as we'll get into, but boy oh boy, was this also a year that, if I'm gonna be honest, was pretty dull in comparison to 2009. And, spoiler alert for next time, 2007. And so, because of that, 2008 just kind of sticks like a sore thumb. And truth be told, now that I think about it, it wasn't just video games that was a problem. I remember not many, iconic music albums being released this year either, or even movies. Other than stuff like WALL-E and Kung Fu Panda. Those would be the exceptions. But as far as I'm concerned, 2008 was just not a good year for media in general. And I know exactly why. Because this was the peak of the Great Recession. And so I think that, just like with COVID with 2021, because you guys remember us talking about that year, it was really bad for video games as well. I feel like that same mentality kind of happened in 2008, unfortunately. Now, that being said, though, I still do think that 2008 is a better year than 2015 and 2021 and 2022. But this is definitely going to be one of the weaker years we're going to be talking about. So, strap in, folks. This is going to be a bit of a bumpy ride. Oh boy. So, but of course, that then gets us into the categories that we will be doing. Because keep in mind, we do our own categories. Why is this not? What the hell? Oh, this is the ending. Shit. Okay. Wow, I forgot. That's the ending slide, not the beginning slide. I should have realized that. Okay, there we go. So, like I said, I was able to still find enough games for each category, but only barely. Because, like I said, some of these categories I had to really stretch as far as, like, you know, finding games. Hell, I even had to change some personal definitions. So, and again, keep in mind, this does suck because obviously, you know, I was a kid back then, and so this is getting into somewhat my childhood. And it does suck for me to say, because, you know, I feel like a lot of people shit on the late 2000s all the damn time. You know, when it comes to, like, a lot of the shows that were coming out, the video games, the movies, the music. And I don't think that's fully justified, you know? Because, like, I feel like there were some amazing things that came out around that time frame that was just kind of ignored. That being said, though, there is a little bit of a grain of truth in there. But I don't really want to kind of, you know, put that on the entire late 2000s. I think it was less to do with that, you know, time period and more so to do with 2008 specifically. So, if it seems like I'm shitting on that year, I genuinely do apologize. And granted, because I'm becoming a fossil nowadays, there's people who are in high school that were born that year, which is just... So, if you were born in 2008, I apologize if it seems like I'm shitting on that year. It's just, for me personally, I just don't think it was a very good year as far as, like, video games are concerned. So, at least as far as the topic that we're going into. Again, at least we have, you know, enough games for every category, but just keep that in the back of your minds. So, of course, let's go over the rules. We are not the Grammys. So yeah, rule number 1, we're not the Grammys. We make sure that, you know, we cover the entire year. We're not doing, like, part of a year and then part of another year. We're not stupid like that. We're not the Grammys here.
Don't yell at me, yell at the Grammys.
Exactly. Rule number 2. Again, granted, this I forgot to remove. I'll remove it on the next one. Must have decent to good launch. That's not really relevant anymore. But what is relevant is no early access games. So games that were in beta, alpha, or pre-alpha around this time, but weren't released officially until, like, you know, 2010, 2011 or so, those will not count. It had to have had its official launch. So there's that. As far as the DLC and expansions category, we're only going to be doing it for games that were not released in 2008, since there were plenty of DLCs that came out around this time for games that came out that same year. I wanted to be fair for the other games. But as far as the game of the year, basically they have to be generally liked and generally appreciated games, and it has to be a completely new game. So no remakes or remasters allowed. And of course, these are only going to be games that I personally chose myself, because, well, these are games that I am personally interested in more so than others, because vibes matter to me. So, but enough about me. Let's get into the actual categories, which we will begin with the best game by a new studio. So now this one was an interesting one, as far as I'm concerned, because 2008 had a decent amount of games come out for, games that were, sorry about that. Like, there were a decent amount of games that were like made by new studios around this time. And some that like I kind of forgot were by new studios. Case in point, all of these games. So let's start with Braid. So Braid was originally an Xbox Live Arcade game, which was, it's a platformer. So it's more so I guess like it's a puzzle platform hybrid game, where you solve like time puzzles and stuff like that. And I'm not gonna spoil the ending, but let's just say that it's not what it appears once you finish the game. So it does offer a pretty cool twist. And if you're interested in 2D platformers from this late into the 2000s, this is definitely a decent choice. So, and yes, even by the late 2000s, there were still quite a few games that were being made that were 2D platformers. It's not just like an indie thing. So that's pretty cool to see. But then we also have our, a role-playing game called Mountain Blade. It is a hack and slash RPG hybrid sort of game where it's, you basically play as a medieval knight, or equivalent of medieval knight. It's a fictionalized world where you basically play as a mercenary, and you pretty much just kind of control your own destiny in a sort of, fashion, and you start building up your own troops, and you fight, a bunch of guys with your own private army, and pretty much try to conquer the map as much as possible. So yeah, no, like, for me personally, this is definitely a game that is a very niche sort of thing, but if you're into like stuff like the chivalry games, or I guess For Honor to a lesser extent, you might be interested in this. So, but of course, those are a bit, more lower scale, more indie, dare I even call a few of them. Lest we forget about the other two games here, Little Big Planet and Left 4 Dead. So this one does kind of suck because, okay, I'll be right back. Hold on. Alright, I'm back. Sorry. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, Little Big Planet. Okay, so Little Big Planet. So this was a, Sony exclusive for the PlayStation 3. And yes, I am well aware with what happened with the servers. That does suck. This year, by the way. But because for context for people, one of the things that was actually pretty cool about Little Big Planet is that it is it's also a platformer. but you were allowed to pretty much create your own custom levels and upload it onto the PlayStation Network for other people to be able to play, which was a pretty big deal at the time. So, yeah, like, that's a pretty awesome feature. Unfortunately, though, they just shut down the ability for you to be able to actually share it amongst other people. So, like, this year. So, yeah. Unfortunately, that is a feature that is just a dead feature. And that sucks because, I mean, you can still make your own custom levels offline, but you can no longer share them. And that was a huge deal earlier this year. It is unfortunate, but at the end of the day, at least you can still have that feature and you can still play, the base game. So it's not entirely lost. And as far as I'm concerned, this is still a game that I would still recommend even regardless. So, especially since, considering that it's a lot more child friendly than the next game we've got on there, Left 4 Dead. So, I remember when, like 3 years ago, I wasn't particularly a big fan of the original Left 4 Dead. Mainly just because I saw it as like, what's the point of playing this if you can just play Left 4 Dead 2? Because, the maps that were in this game were brought in as DLC. But here's the thing. This game still has quite a bit to offer just on its own terms. So, as far as I'm concerned, it actually has a much more balanced way in which you actually play the levels as opposed to whenever they were brought into Left 4 Dead 2. Go watch the video that I did on my YouTube channel about, top 5 co-op shooters. I go into more detail right there, but basically I've gained a bit more of a respect for the original Left 4 Dead. And obviously this was the first game, so as far as I'm concerned about this game, we wouldn't have Left 4 Dead 2. So, and yeah, as far as like, and yes, this is technically a new game because Turtle Rock Studios was the studio who actually made the game. It wasn't Valve. And say what you want about what they eventually would do later on. The fact that they established Left 4 Dead as an IP is a pretty big thing in its own right. So, but of course, let's get into the best game by a new studio. Where's the envelope? It's over here. Because of course, every Game Awards show has the everything inside here because I think it's funny. So, all right. But of course, let's see who the winner is. So, the award for the best game by a new studio for 2008 goes to... I'm trying not to... Left 4 Dead. Yeah. Say what you want about what Turtle Rock would have made later on, because, yeah, admittedly, Turtle Rock Studios' pedigree would unfortunately take a nosedive after this, but you can't deny how much of a big deal that the original Left 4 Dead was. I mean, it was kind of one of the first, games that popularized the co-op sort of shooter genre. It wasn't technically the first, but it was definitely one of the... Well, it definitely wasn't, but it was definitely the one that I do remember hearing about that popularized it for sure. And yeah, no, there's for good reason, because as far as I'm concerned, like, yeah, the weapons are a bit more limited compared to its sequel, but they are much more balanced as far as like actual shooting mechanics, the levels themselves not having weird, like they're more open-ended. And I'd even say that the way in which special infected spawn is pretty, like, spaced out. And I feel like that helps with the game's vision. And it also helps that this game definitely has that classic Source Engine feel to it. Which is, obviously, I've mentioned this plenty of times before, but the Source Engine is, I probably would say, my personal favorite video game engine ever made. I do find it to be a crowning achievement as far as video game technology is concerned, and well, Left 4 Dead 1 still showcases that old school source feel. And well, like I said, say what you want about Turtle Rock Studio. Without this game, we wouldn't have Left 4 Dead 2. So if you love that game, you have to thank this one for that. So I feel like out of obligation, I had to at least talk about Left 4 Dead, Left 4 Dead 1. So, but yeah, that is at least my opinion what the best game by a new studio is. So again, not an award that was in the original Spike Video Game Awards, but this next category for sure is. So, action adventure games. I would definitely say that this was probably the best category for this year, because I mean, I can't really think of anything else that would have been better, because once we get into the specific other categories, it becomes dire, people. I swear to God, it gets bad. But did the Game Awards at least recognize the games? Well, they did for the most part. I'll explain the exception in a little bit. So, but let's first talk about the ones that I definitely do agree with here. So, first off, we got Grand Theft Auto 4. Now, this is going to be weird coming from me because I've said before that I am not like the most, I'm not like a GTA aficionado. I don't typically play a lot of open world games for you guys. And, well, I just feel like, at least with GTA 5, there can be a bit of a stinginess, as far as like some of the gameplay and also GTA Online and stuff like that. But I wouldn't be hard pressed if I were to say that GTA 4 was a bad game, because it's not. It's actually a pretty good game. Granted, it did have a bit of a weird PC port, but as far as I'm concerned, GTA 4 is a pretty respectable game, and I can see why they ended up choosing it as one of their nominees. I also definitely see why they would have chosen Metal Gear Solid 4 as being a part of that. And yes, I purposely chose the European cover because the North American cover is stupid. It's just old Solid Snake's face. Okay. But as far as I'm concerned, Metal Gear Solid 4, I will admit it does have its problems. It is, I'd say it's the weakest mainline Metal Gear Solid game. Yeah. I know some people are iffy with 5, but I do think 5 is probably the best, is superior in several ways. But I would still say that MGS4 is a quality title. Unfortunately, still a PlayStation 3 exclusive, and that's a huge problem. But still a cool stealth shooter game that I would recommend. And then of course we've got ourselves Dead Space, which, yes, this is a game that I just recently replayed for you guys. And yeah, no, this game is still pretty cool. Pretty fucked up in certain instances, though my most recent playthrough kind of may show otherwise as far as my reaction. But trust me, if you guys were there back in 2020 whenever I first streamed this game, yeah, no, this game was terrifying. And in some ways, this game is still terrifying. And yeah, if you want to get into survival horror games, this is actually a pretty good entry point, I would say, as far as the survival horror genre. I will say the PC version does have some quirks. Again, the 2000s was a rough period for PC ports in general. Just laying that out there now. But yeah, no, I would still say that if you want a really good survival horror game, Dead Space is definitely like a good entry point. So, yeah. And then we have Mirror's Edge, which people are gonna give me shit for this, but Mirror's Edge is really not that good of a game. Like, okay, let me explain. So, DICE, the developers of this game, who also make the Battlefield games. If I'm gonna be honest, they were kind of in a rocky period around this time. If you've seen my Battlefield tier list, you know exactly where this is going. I was not a big fan of the direction that DICE was taking in 2008 and 9, because I just feel like a lot of their decisions were misguided, kind of like how Battlefield 5 and 2042 were whenever they launched. And honestly, I remember I streamed this game as well. This is another game that I remember streaming. I think it was 2 years ago, and I just could not really stand the game, because it's a platform parkour-ish game, but it's done in first person, and that's my problem. Platforming, or just any sort of first person parkouring, I just find to be some of the most infuriating shit ever. I can't stand doing that type of shit in games. And since that's the entire game essentially, I can't in good faith nominate this game. And also, the story is just kind of lame. Yeah, and also, here's the thing as well. And this is something that is shocking. Again, keep in mind, they're the developers of the Battlefield games, right? Then, I mean, yeah, just look at the shelf I've got. Battlefield 1942 in Vietnam, Battlefield 2, and 2142 right there. So they have a pedigree for shooter games, but the shooting in this game is so bad for whatever reason. What the fuck? This has got to be one of the worst. This game has some of the worst shooting I've ever played. It is so bad. And I mean, those games weren't particularly I would say had the best shooting either. But I'd rather play the Battlefield games as far as shooting mechanics than this piece of shit thing. I'm sorry, I just don't get the appeal for Mirror's Edge. I find it to be a very bland and kind of generically anti-corporate message, but not really having too much of a substance behind it, which, I mean, this game was published by EA, so there's your reason why. And I don't know, I just did not vibe with this game at all, personally. Thankfully, that was not the winner, because if that was, that would have been Hoodie-itis, but GTA 4 ended up being the winner, which, I mean, that is a completely fair choice. I know some people might have issues with that, because there is a bit of a stigma against GTA 4, at least from what I can tell online. And while I can at least understand from a PC player's perspective, it is still a really damn good game. So, I don't know. Fair choice, but let's improve this. So, okay. This is a problem that I've also noticed about the old Game Awards, and I mentioned this in the previous episode for 2009. The original Game Awards, pre-2013, were notorious for leaving out games that were made by Japanese studios. And the fact that Devil May Cry 4 and Ninja Gaiden 2 weren't even considered is an actual crime. I don't understand. Well, here's the thing as well. Devil May Cry 5 was also kind of snubbed at the 2019 Game Awards, if you guys remember whenever we did that episode. So, yeah, no, Devil May Cry 4 also got snubbed. It's like, dude, why? Devil May Cry 4 is really damn good. Like, I mean, you can argue whether this or 3 or even 5 is, the better game. I feel like, people kind of, they've been moving away from Devil May Cry 1, which sucks, because I like Devil May Cry 1 still, but I've noticed there's been a movement of people who've been kind of pushing away from that, and Devil May Cry 2 has always been a very contentious game, but Devil May Cry 4 is so damn fun. Like, and come on, this was the peak of the hack and slash games as well. Like, yeah, the late 2000s, which obviously we'll get into Force Unleashed in a little bit, but like, yeah, no, like, Devil May Cry 4, if you want a really good hack and slash, there's your fucking pick right there. Easy. And again, another good example of one, Ninja Gaiden 2. Granted, this one is way more challenging than, like, most of the other ones. It's not like a Souls-like or anything like that, but it kind of has very, long times to kill, but you don't have as much, armor protection. So it is a bit of a challenge, but I would still say that Ninja Gaiden is still a very solid entry within a franchise that was obviously being rebooted at the time and did it in a way that didn't feel forced. It was just a natural evolution of what they wanted to do with the first game, like the first reboot game. And yeah, no, Ninja Gaiden 2, another really good hack and slash. And then last but not least, we got The Force Unleashed. Now, this one I feel like is definitely the one that I feel like most people wouldn't necessarily agree with, which that's understandable, because I will admit the story is kind of contrived. And I do wish that the 7th gen version was longer. That being said, though, not only am I going to factor in the stuff for the 7th gen, but I'm also going to factor in the Wii and the PlayStation 2 version, which I actually personally really like. And not just that, but also I do think that this game is still, like, regardless of which version you prefer, I still think that The Force Unleashed is still a really damn fun game to play on its own rights. Because again, it's essentially Star Wars God of War that you're playing here. And yeah, just the amount of stuff that you can customize, at least on like the Wii and PS2 version, and even just the fluid motions that are in the PS3, Xbox 360, and PC version, I still think it's worth at least giving it a bit of an honorable nod. But I'm still going to put it as a nominee because, admittedly, I do really like this game, at least probably more so than a lot of other people. And I do at least recognize the what they wanted to do with this game. They unfortunately fucked it up with the sequel, but I still can recommend you guys, at least if you're interested, I recommend you guys give it a shot. And you can go with either the 7th gen or the 6th gen version, if you so please. But enough about that, of course. Let's get into the winner. So, the award for the best action adventure game of 2008 goes to Grand Theft Auto 4. Yeah, finally, a GTA game wins on our thing. So, which is kind of weird, because I don't hate GTA. I think it's a fine series. It's just not entirely my thing all the time. But GTA 4 is kind of a weird exception to me. So, I mean, first of all, it is an updated version of GTA 3's map. Because it takes place in Liberty City, which is basically just New York. And yeah, it just kind of updates it. It's not a remake, because it has completely different level design, completely different stories and characters and stuff like that. It is not a remake by any definition. It just is a more updated version of that map. And as far as I'm concerned, yeah, this was definitely one of the best, at least, well, I mean, there's this game, and then there's GTA 5, which is San Andreas. Of course, they're making a new Vice City for GTA 6. But oddly enough, I honestly do prefer this over GTA 5. Partially because it is a much faster download compared to GTA 5. But also, okay, here's my thing with GTA. It's not entirely like this, but it kind of... This might sound weird, but it kind of gives me very similar vibes to like vibes that I have issues with a lot of adult animated cartoons. Like, a lot of just the commentary in a lot of GTA games does remind me a lot of like in the way in which shows like Family Guy or The Simpsons does, like, you know, commentary. It's more like just annoying rather than like substantive. And that does make me hesitant at times. That being said, though, putting my bias aside, I still do think that GTA 4 does kind of at least do it in a way that it's not as cringy to me. And it also helps that like this game does have a more modernized control scheme with, you know, more, yeah, just generally more fluid just combat and gameplay compared to the previous GTA games. Also helps that there's tons of side activities you can do in this game. And yeah, this game was pretty detailed as far as open world games for whenever this game came out. This, along with another game we'll get into, were pretty good in that department. And like I said, in a weird twist of fate, I'd probably say this is my favorite GTA game. Like, again, not to disrespect GTA's 3, Vice, San Andreas, or 5, and of course, even the first two. But I feel like this is just kind of the best middle ground, where it still kind of has a lot of those old GTA isms, but it's modern enough, and you can tell that they used this for the basis, as the basis for what they would do with GTA 5. So, that's at least that's how I look at it. So, and yeah, I do think that overall it is a quality game, even if you have to mess around with a PC version. So, alright, so next category. Best platform game. So, again, this was not a category originally at the Game Awards, but I decided to add it in for the 2000s because that was kind of the last decade where they were still pretty popular. Unfortunately, just like with 2009, 2008 didn't really see a lot of major platformer, you know, titans being mentioned around here. But there were a few games that I did end up deciding to choose. Admittedly, one of them was kind of more of a forced choice because I felt like I didn't have a choice. So, yeah. So let's get into what I ended up choosing. So I am nominating Braid and Little Big Planet for this, for the reasons I already mentioned earlier. Braid being more of a puzzle-based platformer, and Little Big Planet being more of a sandbox, which I do think were pretty cool for their respective fields, especially since they were both technically exclusives, and I feel like those were like the more direct comparisons as far as like, competitors. So if either of those seem interesting, I definitely recommend you guys check those out. But I'm also going to give a weird special nod to Mega Man 9. So Mega Man was kind of in a weird spot by the late 2000s, because keep in mind this was 4 years removed from Mega Man X8, which was like last of that series, and the last like mainline Mega Man game was released for the PlayStation 1. So yeah, a bit of an awkward time, but this was considered to be a return to form for the Mega Man franchise, because, well, let's just say that Mega Man's X, 6, 7, and 8 were not very highly regarded, and a lot of the more experimental Mega Man games weren't the most popular either. So to have a Mega Man, like a mainline Mega Man game, come back, but also be able to do it in a way where it felt more natural, and true to form for the older games, was a breath of fresh air. And I respect the game in that respect, like in that regard. And then we've got one more game on here, which is the most hesitant one that I'm adding on here, mainly just because, well, okay. First of all, the name. Ratchet and Clank. Okay, I know Ratchet and Clank games were known for their innuendos, for their name, like for their titles. I am very aware of that. It's just, this is just a dumb name. I'm just gonna be frank. This is just a dumb name. Like, I'm not even gonna say it. But that's not even like the worst part. The worst part is that this game is not a very long Ratchet and Clank game, like, at all. Like, it's more of a bridge game compared to, like, for Tools of Destruction and Crack in Time, it's essentially like it serves more as just kind of a bridge in between those games, rather than it being like a full-fledged game. I mean, for fuck's sake, it never got a physical release in North America either. So, yeah, that's a problem. So, but why am I nominating it? Well, for, frankly, 3 reasons. Number 1, it is still a Ratchet and Clank game in its heart. Like, it still plays like a Ratchet and Clank game. Like, it has the same, fluid control and gameplay that, everyone expects from the franchise. And that's something that I do appreciate. Rule number 2. The implications that this game had leaning up for A Crack in Time were pretty solid as far as I'm concerned. And it helps with the fact that this game had a bit more, I don't want to say teeth, but it definitely had a bit more of a more traditional platformer feel compared to most other Ratchet and Clank games. Because if I'm going to be honest, like, Ratchet and Clank, yes, people associate it with being a platformer, but I see it more as just a general, like, it's more of a third-person shooter with platform elements. That's kind of how I see Ratchet and Clank. Especially, like, games like Up Your Arsenal and Ratchet Deadlocked. Like, I wouldn't really consider either of those platformers. Just more straightforward third-person shooter games. So to have a game that did the opposite of that and focused more on the platforming sections, I can at least give credit for them trying. But then there's the final reason, and it's mainly just because, well, this is the only other game that was a platformer that had a higher score than 70%. There was another Ratchet and Clank game that came out the same year that I do remember playing, but it didn't have enough of a high score for me to feel comfortable nominating. Because again, I'm doing games that not only are, respected, that, like, I personally like, but also games that are also generally respected by other people. I'm not going to be choosing games that, like, I personally like, but aren't liked at all by other people. So, And again, it's not a terrible game. It's fine. It's just, it's got problems. But enough about that. Let's get into the winner. So, here we go. The winner, best platformer game, is, for 2008 anyways, Little Big Planet. Yeah, I'd say out of those choices, this one's probably the one that I do comfortably say is the best. You can definitely make a good case for Braid, but I think Little Big Planet is a pretty cool and unique game. I mean, it has a very unique sort of, art style, which we'll get in slight spoilers. Now we'll get into the art direction, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, it has a very unique sort of look, and because it's a sandbox, like, it has a lot of variety when it comes to the amount of levels and the types of levels that you actually go into. Funny enough, I actually have a bit of a funny story that I remember from like years ago, like easily like more than like 11, 12 years ago. I remember my cousins were playing Little Big Planet on their PlayStation 3, because again, this is a Sony exclusive. And yeah, I remember them just kind of like going through the levels, and I was kind of intrigued by them at the time. And yeah, like, this game offers a lot of like, variety for that. And it also helps that, like, those, getting into the puzzles thing, yeah, like the fact that like this game required a lot of like, physics-based problem solving, i.e. to games like Portal 1 and 2, definitely made this game stand out. And I don't know, basically since then, like, basically ever since my cousins played the game, that got me curious about checking out Little Big Planet more and more. And because of that, I can respect it. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this game does have a custom level editor, so you can create your own levels and pretty much, do how you fit as far as like, that. Unfortunately, you can't share those anymore, but you can at least still create your own if you so desire, which is pretty cool and respectable. So, okay, I'll be right back, because admittedly, I do want to get a drink, because yeah, my throat's already starting to hurt. So I'll be right back. All right, here we go. Let's continue. Role-playing games. Yeah, this year was
Not good.
for role-playing games. It was pretty bad, at least in my opinion. Okay, it wasn't like awful, but like, yeah, this year just, at least in my opinion, was not a very good year as far as the role-playing genre of video games. Or at least, well, not like inherently that good. And well, so because of that, like, I'm not entirely surprised with what the Game Awards would eventually choose. Because, well, let's get into that. So, because yes, this was a category that the Game Awards had. And yeah, I can't agree with, honestly, any of these. So, or at least on principle. So first of all, let's get this out of the way. I've mentioned this plenty of times before, and I'm gonna, keep to it. I don't particularly give a shit about Fallout. I never really did. The only game I'm giving an exception to is Fallout New Vegas, because I do think that, that one's probably the most interesting, at least to me, but even then, I still hate the 50s and 60s aesthetic in that game, and I'm not particularly a big fan of just the actual, like, setting itself. I just don't like the setting. If it was literally any other setting, I would be fine with it. But an alternate 50s, like, an alternate US stuck in the 50s and 60s, I just can't stand. And, well, Fallout 3, not only is it another example of a game that I just don't particularly care about in the Fallout series, but also this game is made worse because this game, I know it's a post-apocalypse, so shut your criticisms right there, because, like, I mentioned this with Fallout 4 as well. I don't care. This game just is an ugly-looking game, even for the time. Like, this game looked pretty bad. Like, again, I know it's a post-apocalyptic, but there's even examples of games that are apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic that at least visually look somewhat competent. Like, I'll just be honest right now. Fallout New Vegas, for a post-apocalyptic game, I think it does look pretty, at least as far as a visual thing. It makes sense that, like, it has a little bit of color to it, and that's fine. But Fallout 3's color palette is literally nothing but the color green. I call it Green Simulator, because it's just the ugliest looking green ever. And admittedly, that was kind of a problem with a lot of games from this time period, the late 2000s, especially like from like 2005 to about like 2010-ish, is that a lot of games just had there was this trend of having games where they only had one color scheme. And even that's not inherently a bad thing, but you gotta at least balance it out a little bit and make it appealing. And Fallout 3 is just one of the worst examples of that. So, I'm sorry. I can't with Fallout 3. Like, so no thanks. Maybe there's like a mod, like a total conversion mod, where it can take place in a completely different game, but at this day right now, I just no. And, well, if I didn't already piss off a lot of people already, I don't particularly care about Fable that much either. And, well, Fable 2, here's the thing. David Cage is the one who made this game, right? Or, like, he was the director, right? Let me double check. I feel like there are certain games that he does. No, he did Heavy Rain. Okay, not David Cage. It was fucking Peter Molyneux. I think he's the one who I think directed like the Fable series, if I'm not mistaken. And again, it's not that like God damn it, hold on. I'm double checking. Yeah, I don't know. He just seems very pretentious at times. Like, this is like, to be fair, I do like some of Peter Molyneux's games. But I feel like this was kind of whenever he started to become a bit pretentious, and that really gets under my skin. And so because of that, like, well, that, and also it's like Fable is more of a parody of a fantasy game rather than like a full fantasy game itself. And that's something that I never jived with at all. Again, okay, if my like Family Guy comparison was weird with GTA, it makes more sense with Fable. I just don't care for parodies, like games that are just essentially like parodies. I just don't find it funny, and I find it more annoying. And again, there's plenty of other open world fantasy games I can think of that I would rather play. Like, so yeah. So, all right, next up, Warhammer Online: Age of Reckoning. Now, this is a weird one because it's not that like I don't agree with this because it was bad. I just can't rank it here because like there's really not an efficient way to play the game because the servers were shut down 10 years ago. Yeah, making this a game that you literally cannot play unless if you could find like someone trying to do like a server. Which, to be fair, I do remember I did try to find a like a fan like server, you know, like a revival fan server project that a lot of these MMOs from around this time people have been trying to do, like trying to like recreate. But I just I can't for the love of me try to set that up at all. It's way more complicated than I was hoping. And so yeah, because of that, it's not that like I don't want to nominate it because I love Warhammer. Again, need I remind you about all the books I got right there and also my 40k army. But it's like I have not played it because like I can't play it. So because of that, I can't give a fair ranking. So but it's essentially just, you know, World of Warcraft but Warhammer themed, which fair, especially considering that Warcraft was originally supposed to be a Warhammer game anyways, so might as well follow up on that success and try to regain some ground, I guess. So yeah. Again, I would love to, you know, I honestly would not have had a problem nominating this, but I just, in good faith, can't. And, well, speaking of in good faith, The World Ends with Toss. Or, yeah, that's what it's called. This is another game that, in good faith, I cannot recommend. Or for this. Why? Because it was not released in 2008. It was released in 2007 in South Korea and Japan first. So that should tell you just kind of how iffy 2008 was for RPGs, by the way. If I don't even agree with any of the choices here, that's a problem. That being said, though, Vault 3 ended up being the one winning. Which, again, I just feel like this was just a case of just it being bad choices across the board. So, in games that, frankly, I just don't think have held up all that much at all. That being said, though, there are RPGs from 2008 that I do think not only hold up, but I would recommend. Enter Persona 4, Infinite Undiscovery, Mountain Blade, which we've already discussed, Castlevania, Order of Ecclesia, and a little well-known PlayStation 3 gem, White Knight Chronicles. So, let's start with Persona 4. So, yes, it took them 8 years to make a sequel to Persona 4, with Persona 5 in 2016. But Persona 4. This one's a weird one, at least when it comes to like the Persona fan base. People do consider this one to be also, again, another weaker game in the series, which I think you are seeing a common pattern with a lot of games that we're talking about, is that like we're talking about games that aren't really all that well respected in their franchises in comparison to other games. That's kind of the problem with 2008, I feel like, is that there's just a lot of these just have better games. There are exceptions to that, don't worry. Like, we'll get into in the next category. There are games that we're going to be talking about that are definitely not the weakest in their respective area, but whatever. As far as like Persona 4 is... Shit. Hold on, did the mic cut off? Shit, hold on. God damn it! Did my No, okay, sorry. I thought the mic cut off again. That would have. No, okay. Yeah, that would have annoyed me. But anyways, yeah, no, Persona 4. Instead of it being superheroes, though, I think it was like a group of like guys going on like like I don't remember exactly what Persona is, but like regardless, I do recognize that Persona 4 is definitely a more quality title. And again, another example of a JRPG game, or just a Japanese game in general, that the original Game Awards just straight up did not give a shit about. Because, well, spoiler alert, all these games except for Mountain Blade, they're all Japanese games. So it's like, that's a bad, very, very bad look, Spike Game Awards. That's a really, really bad look. Which, of course, we'll get in. Let's go away from Persona, and let's get into Infinite Undiscovery. This game was actually made by, I think the original creator of Final Fantasy. Yeah, he decided to kind of make a Final Fantasy game that was basically just Final Fantasy 12, but in a completely different, sort of timeline and not related to Final Fantasy at all. And was a bit more, I guess, urban fantasy. So, but like, I don't know. It's hard to describe, but if you like games like Final Fantasy 12 or 15, I'd recommend you guys check it out. So, it has a very similar sort of like, gameplay style as those games, since it's an action RPG. And yeah, I would recommend, especially since this is like a Xbox exclusive. So if you want like a pretty decent, like deep cut Xbox 360 exclusive, Infinite Undiscovery, not a bad choice at all. And of course that leads us into, okay, well, we've already talked about Mountain Blade. So again, if you like more hack and slash medieval style combat games, go check it out. But let's move on to Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, which is like I said, this was, I think, the last DS Castlevania game. Yeah. This was the last of like the DS games. And yeah, this game is extremely extensive for what I can tell, like surprisingly so. Dare I say that, like, at least, I don't know, it's weird with Castlevania because a lot of people, when they think of Castlevania, they typically think of Symphony of the Night, or they think of like the classic games. I feel like the Game Boy Advanced and the Nintendo DS games in particular, like basically kind of like, I'd say everything sort of post Symphony of the Night just kind of gets overshadowed like a lot. And I don't think that's entirely fair, because this game is a really damn good sort of, action adventure RPG. Like, if that is something that is up your vibe, especially since this is a Metroidvania, yeah, no, go check it out. Especially since, I'm a bit biased because that is the type of Castlevania that I do prefer. I prefer the more Metroidvania styles. So if that's something that you're up to, go check it out. And then, of course, I wanted to give one more nod to another game the White Knight Chronicles. So this was another exclusive for the PlayStation 3. Originally it was a Japanese only game. It came out on Christmas of 2008, so it wouldn't have even made the Spike Video Game Awards. Actually, it probably wouldn't either anyways, not only just because it's a Japanese game, but also the North American release wouldn't come out until 2010. But I'm counting it for 2008 since that was the Japanese release. And again, it's another action RPG. This one definitely more high fantasy feeling. And yeah, it's just, a little neat, sort of cult classic for the PlayStation 3, especially since, like I said, this was kind of an awkward year for RPGs in general. So if you want a RPG that has a lot of, liberties as far as, the high fantasy approach, White Knight Chronicles is definitely one that I would personally recommend. But, of course, or at least I think it's an action. Let me double check. So, I might be confusing it. Yeah, I am checking right now. So... Oh no, it is turn-based. Sorry, I apologize. Okay. So, okay, well then in that case, yeah. I think that's actually a better recommendation. Okay, if you like, more action RPG-based stuff, Infinite Undiscovery. If you like the turn-based White Knight Chronicles, there. That's my... Sorry, I was getting the... Admittedly, they're two very similar games, and it doesn't help that they're both console exclusives to their respective consoles. I apologize. White Knight Chronicles is, yeah, if you like one or the other, go check them out. So cool. But anyways, let's move on to what I'm going to choose. So, here we go. The award for the best RPG of 2008 goes to... Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. So, I'm biased because I love my Metroidvanias. I think that it's definitely the style of 2D like side-scrolling games that I prefer the most because of the versatility that a lot of them offer and the progression. But what does this game offer? Well, first of all, this was the last of the DS games. But as far as, it being a Metroidvania, admittedly, it has a lot more in common with, obviously with, the other games, but it has a bit more in common with, the Game Boy Advance games in certain respects. It's a bit more of a slower game. So, I guess it's just kind of more, this might sound weird, but I think it's because it's a very solid Castlevania game that doesn't really try to, do anything else. I think is kind of why I ended up choosing it. And again, I'm biased because of the Metroidvania elements, but that's just kind of why I like it, is because of the fact that it is a Metroidvania. And, well, it also helps that this game, and this is definitely the thing that this game does offer, the more open-ended world design does help with this game. And it also makes it to where it gets pretty exciting whenever you do get into into Dracula's castle, because, that open world outside is half the game. The other half is inside of Dracula's castle. So, yeah, that being able to have those being able to have basically more of a balance of the outside and the inside in comparison to other games in the series where they're almost exclusively inside the castle was a breath of fresh air. And it also helps that there's tons of character depth, both in terms of its narrative as well as its character custom, its leveling up systems. So I think that's essentially why I ended up choosing Order of Ecclesia, because I just think that it is an overall solid handheld Castlevania game that I would recommend you guys check out, especially if you're more into the Metroidvania style and not really the platformer style. So, all right, best shooter game. So 2008 obviously was the follow-up to 2007, which 2007 had a ton of amazing shooter games to offer. So 2008 had a lot of shoes to fill. And truth be told, it was fine as far as like a year for shooter games. Obviously, we mentioned Left 4 Dead. But what about like other games? Well, let's see what the Game Awards had to say about that. I mean, Left 4 Dead 2, obviously, that's fair. A lot of sequels, though. Or Left 4 Dead 1, excuse me. But yeah, 2s. You got Resistance 2 and Gears of War 2, first off, which were both exclusives for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. You can probably sense another pattern. A lot of this is involving a lot of the exclusives going up against each other. Excuse me. I mean, okay, here's the thing about Resistance 2. It's not like a terrible game, but it's easily the worst Resistance game, at least out of the mainline ones. It's just doesn't really stick out in comparison to 1 or 3. Like Resistance 3 had a pretty compelling narrative about like, you know, the events after this like alternate war. But this game, I feel like, just kind of is more self-indulgent of its alternate 1950s. Very similar to Fallout, that I just cannot jive with it. And it doesn't help that, like, this game's story is bad. Like, it's pretty bad. Like, again, Insomniac, you guys do amazing stuff with Ratchet & Clank, and you guys made Spyro. But, oh my god, this is definitely lame. I'm sorry if I'm yawning. This is definitely one of their weaker games, for sure. And, unfortunately, did kind of, you know, honestly, it helped kind of fuel a lot of the, you know, PlayStation 3 bashing that was going on at the time. So, yeah, Resistance 2, I cannot in good faith recommend on this list. Now, Gears of War 2, on the other hand, yeah, I see it. Especially since, you know, this game was basically just an improvement on, basically just Gears of War 1, but on steroids and, you know, with more fluid shooting mechanics. And also, this was definitely the game that, along with Left 4 Dead, also did help, you know, promote the idea of the co-op shooter with its horde mode. Granted, I think that was a DLC or like an update. It didn't come out on launch. But yeah, like that was a pretty fun mode that they added in. And yeah, no, this game, as far as the Gears of War game is concerned, yeah, definitely, I would say, earns its stripes for sure. But then we got Far Cry 2. This fucking game, I remember streaming this game last year for like a month. And yeah, I had a ton of fun with Far Cry 2. Like, yeah, it has, some people do find it to have its problems. And yes, I will admit, the game's the unfortunate crime that this game does commit the most is that it is a very dull game at times. Very similar to Fallout 3. It is a very brown game. But that's the only thing. That's honestly the only thing that's wrong with Far Cry 2. Everything else about it is solid. Like the mission structure, the open world itself. Oh, and also the fact that you can't replay the open world if you finish the campaign. That is admittedly like the other thing that's pretty dumb about that. That along with like this game along with Assassin's Creed 1 really needed like a free roam mode. I don't know why they don't offer that, but whatever. Far Cry 2, despite those two issues, I would genuinely say is at least what I would have chosen as far as like the best shooter games in this sort of thing. Gears of War was the one that ended up winning, which fair, like that is a fair choice. But make no mistake, we can always improve things. And improve things, we sure as hell will. So, here we go. Rainbow Six Vegas 2 and Brothers in Arms Hell's Highway. So, we just played Hell's Highways last week as well. Another game we just recently played. But I'm grouping both of them together because I do find them to be pretty solid tactical shooters in their own right. Obviously, with Rainbow Six Vegas 2, this was sort of the last Rainbow Six game for almost a decade. And I do find this to be a much superior game over the first, as far as the visuals, as far as the actual movement, the weapon loadouts. Like, it's basically what Vegas 1 should have been. And yeah, no, I have a lot of fun playing, and also the progression is so rewarding in this game. Like, yeah, no, like, at least in my opinion, Vegas 2 is definitely a game that I would recommend you guys play on your own. Even the terrorist hunt is really fun in this game. Like, dare I say, it's the best terrorist hunt, or at least one of the better terrorist hunts in the series. Basically, it's co-op mode. And even just the actual levels themselves are vastly better than the first game, than the first Vegas game. And I think this game does benefit the cover shooting mechanics and complements it way better overall. So I will say it is definitely more of an arcadey Rainbow Six game because it has the health regen and you still have infinite ammo with your pistols. But I think honestly, Vegas 2 is probably the second best Rainbow Six game, at least in my opinion. Like, yeah, I'm not gonna whatever. Go check out Vegas 2. In my opinion, it's a game that I would recommend. If you have to play Vegas 1 to understand what's going on, then fine. You don't technically need to. You can play this relatively on your own and you would still get what's going on. But rest assured, Vegas 2, pretty good choice. Now with Brothers in Arms, I'm more so commemorating this game, not because of its gameplay, because it almost plays nearly identical to that of Vegas 2, funny enough. But I am more so complimenting this game for its narrative, because this game is definitely a more cinematic World War II game, and it's a bit more of an interpersonal one. And yes, even though I still do have my problems with it, it is a solid enough game within the Brothers in Arms series that I would recommend this over the first two. And I still stand by that. So, and dare I say, it's a pretty good World War II game. Which, of course, there's one other World War II game on here that we'll get into in a little bit. But if you want, a more tactical-based World War II game that does more, CQB-based stuff, go check out Hell's Highway. It does end abruptly, though. I will warn you there. But then I'm also going to give a bit of a nod to Stalker Clear Sky, which serves as a prequel to Shadow of Chernobyl, which I find to be a pretty damn good in its own right. Clear Sky sort of continues on that sort of, a lot of the stuff that they were, that they had in that game, and they applied it to this. And yeah, no, like, I just find it to be a pretty overall solid, like, apocalyptic game that I find way more appealing than anything Fallout related. Don't at me. So, if that interests you, I'd recommend you guys check out Clear Sky. It's a bit more survival based, so do keep that in mind. And then last but not least, you guys would be hard pressed if I did not mention Call of Duty World at War. So this is a game that honestly got a lot of shit when it first came out. And yeah, because, well, by 2008, people were tired of World War II games. Like, Brothers in Arms Hell's Highway, unfortunately, just did not sell enough copies, and because of that, that's partially why we have not seen a new Brothers in Arms game. And, well, World at War underperformed in comparison to Call of Duty 4, and whenever Modern Warfare 2 came out, they didn't, like, Activision did not want to bother with another World War II Call of Duty game for another 9 years. And that's pretty pathetic, especially considering that World at War, truth be told, not only is it, the best, World War II Call of Duty game, it actually might be one of the best Call of Duty games, period. Due to its, amazing, campaign experience, its excellent multiplayer, which, well, yes, is the same as Call of Duty 4's, does the World War II skin, superbly. And I'm not even getting into zombies. I digress, though. So, go check out World at War. You will not regret it. But of course, there can only be one winner. Because, again, I would say that, like, 2008, I'd say it was a really good year for shooter games as well. Not as good as 2007, but, like, honestly, a better year than you would think. But of course, there can only be one winner. I'm sorry. God. All right. Let's get the award. So, the award for the best shooter game of 2008 goes to Far Cry 2. It should not surprise you that Far Cry 2 is in fact the winner for the best shooter game. Like, World at War is a pretty close one, but I think the objective answer would... Oh, okay, not objective, but like, it's a pretty close tie. But ultimately, I ended up choosing Far Cry 2 because, for a number of reasons, this is a vastly superior game over Far Cry 1. Holy shit, Far Cry 1 has aged like sour milk. Do not play that game. Play this instead. Which helps that it has barely anything to do with Far Cry 1. Except, well, one character, but I'm not going to spoil anything. But as far as, a continuation, you could honestly play this game without playing Far Cry 1, or shit, you don't even have to play any of the other games, and you would still have a fun time in this game. And it also is helped by the fact that this game has, in my opinion, one of the more unique settings for any game. It takes place in an unnamed country somewhere in southern Africa, like in sub-Saharan Africa, most likely somewhere around southern Sudan, Ethiopia. It's around that region there. And yeah, as far as portraying the conflicts that do happen in sub-Saharan Africa, it does it in a way that I feel like is more so just kind of showing light on just how unfortunately unstable the region was because of colonialism. And just the fact that, these countries were basically left to fend for themselves. in a very brutal environment. And there's a lot of story, like visual storytelling that happens throughout the game because of that. And also, since this was the first open world game in the series, because the first game was not an open world, this game is, that pretty much lends itself to be able to have a lot more survival mechanics being added in, such as the, animations for whenever you try to heal yourself and you take out like bullet wounds and like shrapnel and shit like that. Like, it's small details, but those small details add up to such an immersive experience that you don't really see in a lot of other games back then and even now. And of course, I'd be hard pressed to mention the environmental detailing in this game. This honestly, I would dare say, is the game with the most environmental detailing in any game. It is that damn impressive. You can shoot individual limbs on trees. There's tons of ray reflections going off of like different shadows and lights. There's a lot more realistic looking, explosions and fire spread. The actual AI, like enemy AI, is a lot more strategic. Like, it will actually change tactics depending like on whatever scenario you bring up against it. Like, Far Cry 2 honestly is probably one of the most immersive games that I've ever played. And I had a blast playing it with you guys last year. It was honestly one of the best streams that I've done. Like, it's definitely one of the best series I've done, just period. And I highly recommend you guys check it out for yourselves. Like, if there's any game I would recommend you guys check out first in the Far Cry series, I mean, that'd probably go to Far Cry 3 or 4, but like, as a next step, go check out Far Cry 2. It is so damn fun. So yeah, alright. Let's calm ourselves a little bit and let's get into the Sim strategy category. A category that was not originally in the Game Awards, but is a category that we're going to choose because we want to recognize these games. So, yeah. This year was kind of a tough year to decide. I do have enough games, but I don't know, man. The late 2000s was not the greatest time to be a sim or strategy fan. And yeah, 2008 unfortunately wasn't really the greatest year. But there are a few games that I'm going to recommend. So let's start off with Advance Wars, Days of Ruin. This was the last mainline game of the Advance Wars series, because there hasn't been a game in 15 years, unless if we're obviously talking about the reboot remakes made by WayForward. And I like the Wars series, or at least the mainline games, where it is an actual strategy game, turn-based tactical strategy. And this is again similar to Order of Ecclesia with Castlevania. It's not a game that I would say completely changed the game for the for the Wars series, but for what it is, it's still a game that I think is pretty cool. And if you have a Nintendo DS, there's no reason not to check it out. So, well, unless if it's one of those games that's expensive for stupid reasons, which I'm assuming it is. So you might have to pull up a hook. But it's definitely a game that I would still recommend if you are more into that turn-based tactics stuff. So, which, speaking of turn-based tactics, this one's going to be an awkward game for me to talk about, but is a game that, I could still see the appeal for. Valkyria Chronicles. So, this one, like I said, is kind of a weird one because this was I think this was also a PlayStation 3 exclusive at the time. or at least it was like a console only exclusive at the time. And it's basically like a alternate World War II that's anime themed, as you can probably tell. But it does add in some role playing elements. It's kind of, I don't want to compare it directly to Fire Emblem, but it's similar in that regard. And yeah, I can definitely see the appeal. It's much more of an XCOM style, which you guys know how much I fucking love XCOM. So if you want a game that is more XCOM style, but has a bit of an anime World War II aesthetic, Valkyria Chronicles is definitely a game that like fills that niche. So I definitely recommend it to you guys. Alright, next up, Sins of a Solar Empire. So this is a real-time strategy game, very similar in vein to the Homeworld games. Homeworld. And it's set in space, and it's basically like space naval combat. And yeah, as far as that gameplay style is concerned, it does it in a pretty cool way. Again, it's more of a spiritual successor to Homeworld than being its own thing. So if that does annoy you because it's just a Homeworld ripoff, not necessarily. Like, it's more so paying homage to it, especially since, keep in mind, Homeworld 3 would not be made until literally this year. Unfortunately, I've not heard very good things about Homeworld 3, which hurts, but as far as when this game came out, it came out 5 years after Homeworld 2 came out. I doubt they were thinking of making a sequel around that time. So to have a game to kind of fill the void, no pun intended, was definitely something that was pretty cool. So if that's something that interests you, I'd recommend it. Of course, that wasn't even the biggest RTS game of that year. That honor has to go to Command & Conquer Red Alert 3. So, being the last real Command & Conquer game, for Command & Conquer 4 doesn't exist, by the way. Yeah, I can see where people are coming from. Though, okay, here's the thing. The Red Alert series has always been a weird one for me to talk about, especially, like, specifically this game. Because, I mean, this game, I feel like, is more known for its cutscenes rather than its gameplay. Like, yes, this is the game that has Tim Curry and George Takei basically just playing themselves, like, LARPing as dictators. Yes, this is that game. So, and I will admit, it is a pretty, like, as far as, like, presentation, and as far as, its narrative not really taking itself seriously, yeah, no, as far as those are concerned, this game is a treat in that regard. And I would honestly just recommend playing this game just for those cutscenes alone. That is definitely worth your time. That being said, though, why am I talking about the cutscenes instead of the gameplay? Well, that's mainly because I still like the gameplay. Don't get it twisted. I like my RTS games. I do find them to still be pretty enjoyable to play. But the thing with Red Alert 3 is that it is a lot more micromanagement. It's more of a micromanagement game rather than a macro management. What do I mean by that? Basically, if you guys remember, I tried streaming Age of Mythology a few days ago. And that game is what I would call a micromanagement game, where it's essentially you are a bit more focused on smaller individual units, going on little skirmishes rather than building up a massive force to go into multiple battles throughout the map. it's kind of hard to explain, but like if you see the gameplay of like this game and then compare it to Tiberium Wars, Command and Conquer 3, the game that preceded this the previous year in 2007, you'll know exactly what I mean. Basically, this game has, lower unit counts and has a lot more, to do with like how well you use individual units rather than like how many units you're able to muster up in a certain amount of time. So it's not a bad gameplay style. I just personally prefer the Tiberium Wars way of which Command and Conquer plays. So, though, like I said, this game is still, I would still recommend it, even if I have that, bit of a caveat. And, well, that then leads us into the last game, Spore. So, this one's a complicated one to talk about because this game had a very rocky development. So, first of all, this game was in development for 8 years. So, like, where's the... Yeah, this took a long ass time. Like, that game took a long ass time to make. And so that was already a bit of a red flag for people. But when this game first came out, a lot of people were extremely disappointed with it, saying that like, a lot of the, features that were promised were cut and that it was more of a fraction of what it could have been. And while I do agree with like some of the criticisms that people have, I still don't think that takes away from just how creative and innovative this game is. Like even though this game did not have every single thing that people wanted, this game was still, at least on a technological level, was still one of the most impressive games I've ever played. So, because again, this is a game that is more of a sandbox simulation game where you can pretty much, create your own individual little creature and have them evolve over time, to where it starts becoming more evolving from like a life simulation game all the way up into being a straight up strategy game. And that sort of mixing of genres I find to be so damn interesting. And it also helps that this game has tons of customization, not just for your individual creatures, but also for like the architecture for your buildings and even the individual even the individual like vehicles that you can use for your creatures. Like the tools that are at your disposal is insane with this game. And because of that, I have a high amount of respect for this. It is a damn shame, though, that this was the last game that saw Will Wright working on, or at least, like, this was the last game where, he worked on, like, and saw it get released before he eventually left Maxis. Because, yes, this was a Maxis game. But because of this game's initial lackluster, sales, yeah, he eventually left the company in 2009, and he hasn't really wanted to go back since. Like, obviously, the last game that he had direct involvement with was The Sims 3, but yeah, the writing was on the wall as far as, like, Maxis is concerned. But as far as a game, yeah, no, Spore, I would hella recommend to you guys. So, but of course, there can only be one winner, as always. So, and well, this choice is gonna be shocking for some people, but I do genuinely think that this is honestly the best choice for the 2008 Sim strategy category. So, but of course, let's get this going. So, the award for the best Sim strategy game of 2008 goes to Spore. Yeah. Again, this might be weird for people, but I'll explain. So, again, first of all, this game is technically both genres, making this probably the only game that like truly fits the sim strategy game category as a winner. So, but in all seriousness though, the fact that like it is both genres actually works in its benefit, and I do consider it to be one of the coolest examples of a game that is able to do that and stand on its own. And as I said, since this is a sandbox game alongside that, there is tons of customization that has been added to this game. Like you can pretty much create anything that you want, provided you unlock everything as you get through the game. And just being able to have that amount of freedom is so damn fun. Yeah, I will admit the game may look a bit older than it should by this point. Like it looks a bit, it looks like a couple years, out of date. That still does not change the fact that I think part of that is because of just, how much shit there is in this game that you can do. But also, I feel like that shouldn't take away from the fact that this game is actually pretty compelling for a lot of it. And of course, this game has a ton of exploration to it, not just whenever you're in the creature stage, but even whenever you get into the galactic stage. There's a lot. And again, I know this game had a lot of shortcomings and false promises that were made, and dare I say, some of those things that I could have been added, I wish were added. But you cannot deny that not only was the ambition there, but the ambition, I do think, ultimately paid off. And that's why I would recommend you guys at least give Spore a check, give it a chance. Yeah, it's a bit more childish than what it was led to believe back in the E3 2005 trailers. But again, this is still a game that honestly has a lot of depth going for it. So, yeah, at the end of the day, if you want a more, I guess general, and again, if you want a game that isn't necessarily an edutainment game, because I do not see this as an edutainment game, but if you want a game that takes the idea of evolution and spins it on its head and does it in a way that allows for so much creativity beyond that, I'd recommend you guys check out Spore. So that's at least how I see it. So, all right, racing, fighting, and sports. So, oh shoot, hold on, what's going on? Oh, sorry, yeah, I thought I checked them. Okay, so obviously these were individual categories in the Game Awards, but I like to combine them because, again, generally speaking, I'm not the biggest fan of most of these categories. Racing, I'm starting to become a bit more of a fan of, but I digress. But there were a decent amount of games from 2008 that caught my attention with this category. Dare I say, pretty overshadowed, I feel like. But let's get into them. So, yeah. You can probably see where this is going. Okay, so, first off, Burnout Paradise. This was the last mainline Burnout game to come out. This one was a bit more... I guess this one was kind of more of a quasi open world game, right? And so yeah, basically akin to something like Forza Horizon nowadays. And well, since it's a burnout game, that means there's going to be a lot of, more destruction in comparison to your other typical racing games. And yeah, despite the fact that I do feel like this game is kind of seen as like a weaker game in the Burnout series, I still think that it's worth a check out, even if like there are some compromises you're gonna have to deal with in comparison to the first 3 Burnout games. I still think that if you want a game that is a bit more loose as far as a racing game, Burnout Paradise is not a bad pick. So I recommend it. So yeah, admittedly the only kind of somewhat realistic game on here, even though the destruction is over the top in Burnout, but whatever. Let's go the opposite. Mario Kart Wii. So this one is so weird because usually I remember I don't really ever get into games whenever they're first new. I typically wait a few years until I find a sale or the game just kind of drops in price for me to kind of get into a lot of the games that I'm into now. Well, truth be told, Mario Kart Wii, as far as I remember, was one of the last games for a decade that I remember we got fairly close to whenever it first came out. And that was definitely for the better at the time, because Mario Kart Wii, I'm not gonna lie, was pretty fun. And keep in mind, I wasn't particularly the big this was starting around the time whenever I was kind of getting a bit tired of the first Wii that we owned. I don't know, it's just we kind of burnt ourselves out with the Wii by this point. But whenever we got Mario Kart Wii, oh my god, that was a lot of fun. And well, I've been playing quite a bit of Mario Kart Wii recently. And yeah, a part of me does still think this game is pretty fun. Granted, I guess that's a little bit nostalgia, which I usually don't like using that as an argument for anything. But even just putting that aside, I still think this game genuinely is a solid kart racer. If you want a really good kart racer to begin with, Mario Kart Wii is honestly a really damn good choice. It may not be the most accessible game nowadays, especially since Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is definitely the most accessible Mario Kart game to date, and it also helps that that game has a shit ton of courses, many of which were even in this game. But I would still recommend you guys check out Mario Kart Wii, even just on the basis of technically Mario Kart 8 might be the superior game. Mario Kart Wii can still be a fun time to check out. So, well, speaking of Mario, Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Now, yes, this is technically a different franchise. Yes, it has Mario in it, but it's a different franchise. Therefore, we can still rank this, because I don't like ranking 2 games from the same franchise. So, this is another weird one, because this is a game I just picked up, a month ago. Yeah, I got it for $20. So, yeah, I just, I got this. But this game does kind of have a bit of a reputation. So, this was the first Super Smash Bros. Game to come out in 7 years. And what didn't help is that this was the game that followed up Melee. Every esports player's favorite Super Smash Brothers game. So yeah, this game right here, let me get the tag off for a second. So yeah, like, this game right here had some pretty big shoes to fill. And I feel like this game does get a lot of bad faith criticism towards it. Like, a lot of people just, I guess they just really don't like the fact that this is a much slower paced Super Smash Brothers game. And I don't think that's an entirely fair criticism, because keep in mind, not only was this the first game in 7 years, but also, the Wii was was the most successful console for Nintendo for decades. And so they needed a game that was a bit more of an entry level, especially since, again, this is a game that came out, this is a game that came out on a console that was a bit more of a not really gamer audience. And so by having a game that was a bit more, of an entry level game, I think was very warranted. And truth be told, I played this, a couple times since I got it. And, as someone who isn't particularly as efficient in Super Smash Bros. As a lot of other people, this game, honestly, because this game is a lot slower paced, it actually does kind of help me learn how to play the game. Like, I feel like this is, like, I like to call this game, like, the tutorial Smash Bros. Game, or, like, the most entry-level Smash Brothers game. And because of that, yeah, no, I would recommend you guys pick up a copy if you can. So, especially since I got this for $20, I have a feeling the prices are going to start coming up for Wii games. So, make sure you check it out. Like, even though, yes, this is... Smash Bros. Melee fans hate Brawl, but the prices I feel like are going to come up. So I would recommend you guys pick it up as soon as you guys can. And then last but not least, we've got Soul Calibur 4, which, again, this one was another one that I remember was kind of memed upon, because, I mean, just look. What's the problem with Soul Calibur 4's cover here? Yes. Yoda is in this game, as well as Darth Vader for the PlayStation 3. This is the 360 cover. Starkiller is also from Force Unleashed. He's also in both the PS3 and the Xbox 360 version. So they also had a DLC where you can play Vader on Xbox and Yoda on PS3, but they removed that fucking years ago, which is annoying. But that's what happens when stupid licensing agreements get in the way with games. But anyways, so that turned a lot of people off, because Soul Calibur is a series that is known for being a fantasy or it's more of a fantasy fighting game. It is not sci-fi. It's fantasy. Though I do have a funny story about Soul Calibur 4. This was actually the first Soul Calibur game that I played. Shut up. Okay, I remember I got into this because Yoda was in the game. Oh my god, I'm sorry. This is so stupid. I feel like I've been telling a lot of dumb stories as of late. But whatever. You get the point. Is that, like, honestly, this might sound weird, but, like, yeah, Soul Calibur 4, at least as far as I remember, was the first fighting game I remember playing. Now, granted, I do acknowledge that Soul Caliburs 2 and 3 are better games, and hell, I will even say Soul Calibur 5 is probably better than this, but I would still say that Soul Calibur 4 gets a bad rep because of the Star Wars characters. I still think even ignoring that, Soul Calibur 4 is still a fun fighting game. Like, if you just ignore that, it's on the same level as the previous games, I would argue. And again, I'm biased. I don't particularly care that Star Wars characters are in Soul Calibur. I find it to be something that just kind of adds a little bit more. Well, yeah, they're guest characters. You know, guest characters have been in Soul Calibur since Soul Calibur 2. So I never really had a big problem with Star Wars characters. Like, because again, I feel like that's another bad faith argument that people have against this game, which is annoying as fuck, by the way. Like, stop making bad faith arguments for games. It pisses me off. But anyways, I recommend you guys check out Soul Calibur 4. Like, give it a chance. Because, like, I still find it to be a pretty fun game. So, even though, like I said, I personally wouldn't even say it's the best, it's definitely one that, like, I would still recommend. But of course, let's get into the winner. Because I feel like we're, belating time a little bit. So, here we go. So, the award for the best sports racing fighting game for 2008 goes to Mario Kart Wii. Oh shoot, hold on. Sorry about that. Okay, hopefully I don't get interrupted again. But anyways, but yeah, no, Mario Kart Wii. I feel like it's probably the least controversial game for me to have the winner. I don't think I need to really explain this one. It has some of the best race tracks in the entire series. The stunt mechanics were pretty much, cool and all that fun stuff. It has a wide variety of characters that weren't seen in previous Mario Kart games, that they wouldn't really bring back until Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And, well, it has very smooth gameplay, and I would personally consider it to be my personal favorite Mario Kart game. Again, I'm biased because I do remember having a lot of fond memories with it, but regardless, I would still say that Mario Kart Wii is pretty good in its own right. So go check it out. Alright, so multiplayer games. So this is kind of another weird category, I would say. The choices that they ended up choosing for the actual Game Awards aren't particularly terrible, except for one. But I do feel like it is kind of missing a lot of games. And, well, you see kind of the problem here. Why the fuck is Resistance 2 on here? Again, Resistance 2 is just not a game that I feel like has held up particularly well at all. So, yeah, like, it's just not really all that great. And yeah, I do feel like that, in my opinion, that's a bit of an L. But then, if I'm gonna be honest as well, Gears of War 2 also is a game that, like, I do respect, and I do like its horde mode. But I feel like I would have to rank both the PvP alongside the PvE. And I have zero experience when it comes to Gears of War 2 multiplayer, PvP wise. So, because of that, I personally cannot really rank it, if that makes sense. Now, that being said, though, Call of Duty World of War and Left 4 Dead 1, both of those make sense. Like, I would definitely say that they're both like respectable games in their own right. And yeah, I definitely do think that, like, they deserve to be here in the nod. Left 4 Dead ended up winning, which again, fair enough. But let's change this up a little bit. So I'm gonna replace Gears of War 2 and Resistance 2 with Rainbow Six Vegas 2 and Mario Kart Wii. But I'm also going to give a little bit of a shout out to Army of Two. I did nominate this for Best Shooter Game because there were already enough games in that category. But as far as a game that is basically a Gears of War clone, but specifically designed to be a cooperative experience, I think it did a pretty good job. It has its problems. Like, for example, the story is kind of lame. And like, there's some questionable level design, but the actual gunplay and the use of your either your co-op player or your AI partner, I think actually really makes this game like stand out amongst the crowd of other shooters that were coming out around that time. I will say it is a bit harder to be able to play nowadays because of the fact that this was, this is a console exclusive. They never released this game on PC. Though to be fair, they did release this game through the Xbox backwards compatibility platform, so you can play this game on Xbox One and Series consoles if you so desire. And again, if you want like a third-person, shooter that is a bit more like it's more like grounded in a more familiar setting, I'd recommend you guys check it out. So even if, like I said, there's some questionable level design. So, but anyways, here we go with the best multiplayer. So the award for the best multiplayer game of 2008 goes to Call of Duty World at War. So, I mean, this should not surprise any of you guys who have been watching my streams. I love World at War. It's one of my favorite Call of Duty games ever, and dare I say, it's honestly one of the best World War II games ever made. But of course, let's get into the reasons why this is going to win. So, this game does have the same progression as Call of Duty 4. As a matter of fact, it is made on the same exact engine, which a lot of people had that issue with the game when it first came out. And I can see, at least in hindsight, see why people would have a problem with World at War, because people basically saw it as Call of Duty 4, but in World War II. If this wasn't, like, it obviously in a vacuum, in a, post, like, basically in, like, a 2024 world where, Call of Duty was released every goddamn year, I guess that's a pretty valid criticism. But here's the thing, is that Call of Duty 4's systems were already so damn good, and, well, Treyarch pretty much worked on this game for, like, 2 years, that they kinda took the idea of, like, why fix what isn't broken, so let's just do what Infinity Ward's doing. So, that, and also, like, I'm not gonna lie, again, I do feel like that people who criticize this game for being a World War II game, like, and not being as cool, That's another example of a bad faith argument. Doesn't mean that this game is a World War II reskin of Call of Duty 4. Does not mean that this game is bad. As a matter of fact, this game stands out in comparison to Call of Duty 4 in several ways, specifically involving its, level design being more, I guess more combat focused in the American Japanese sections, and being more narrative focused on its Soviet German campaign. So, and because you actually play in between those sections more so in comparison to Call of Duty 4, where you don't really go back to the Middle East after Act 1, it allows that sort of blending of both of those campaigns, even if they don't have anything to do with each other, really. Just being able to experience that is cool. Obviously, that's campaign. As far as multiplayer, like I said, it has the same progression as Call of Duty 4, but it has a few tweaks. So obviously, this game relies more on semi-autos and bolt actions in comparison to assault rifles, which adds that sort of fun to a lot of the World War II weaponry. And the level and the actual maps themselves are iconic, like Castle, this game's version of Dome, Cliffside, also Airfield, Asylum. Like, there's some pretty iconic maps. And of course, Zombies mode is pretty legendary within the series. Yes, Noctura and Toten being a bit of a bare bones map might be boring for a lot of people, but at the time, that was a big deal. Like, and it's weird to say, but yeah, no, World at War was the game that popularized the Zombies Horde mode. Well, just Horde modes in general. And it's funny, too, because this game predates Left 4 Dead 1 by a week. So, yeah, like, as far as co-op shooters, you can make a really good case that World at War was the game that popularized that. And, well, I already said it earlier, I do consider this to be the best World War II game ever made. It's that damn good. So, if you want, like, a solid game that depicts World War II in a pretty realistic, way, that honestly doesn't really try to glorify it, because this is one of the few Call of Duty games that I would definitely say does not portray war in a good way. Like, it does portray it in a very grim way. Like, if you're someone who just kind of gets tired of Call of Duty games being self-indulgent and being basically like a superhero with a gun, this game might be more your jive. And of course, as always, this game has amazing mod support. It has extensive zombies custom zombies maps. So many I couldn't even count. And also, another bonus, the PC version has all the DLC released for free. So as far as I'm concerned, the PC version is the best way to go. So, but yeah, World at War, amazing. Go check it out. Alright, DLC expansion. So, they didn't actually have this as a category for 2008. They had it for 2009, 10, 11, and 12, but not 2008, which I thought was pretty interesting. That being said, I was able to come up with a few games for this category. Obviously we've got, Command & Conquer's Kane's Wrath, which was the expansion released for Command & Conquer Tiberian Wars. And yeah, this one adds in, it's more of a unit pack than it is, or I guess a faction/unit pack, because this adds in technically 6 new factions, but they're more sub-factions of the ones that are already in the base game. They just are more specialized. And yeah, I do find that sort of gameplay of changing around, these factions to where they focus on like specific aspects to be a pretty cool way. Granted, I will admit I kind of wish that it would have just been just straight up new, fresh factions just in general. But I can still at least respect them trying to branch out. And so Kane's Wrath, I would definitely still recommend regardless. And then we have Crisis Warhead, which obviously is the expansion to the base game of Crisis, which I still need to play Crisis Warhead for you guys. I apologize. But yeah, if you want like a continuation of just the story of Crisis, but told through this perspective of one of the guys who left you to fend for yourself in the base game, then yeah, it's a good excuse for you to get back into the game, especially since this game, like this expansion, adds in a few new weapons for you to try out. So that's pretty nice. And then we've got Civilization 4's colonization expansion. This was the last major expansion for Civ 4, and well, Civ 4 being Civ 4 obviously adds in a lot of, in the name it implies that it adds in a lot of content involving a lot of post medieval content, and so if that interests you, I'd recommend you guys check it out. And then we've got World of Warcraft's Wrath of the Lich King. So this, even as a kid who didn't know anything about World of Warcraft as much, even I knew that this was a big deal. I remember seeing, this game, obviously World of Warcraft, huge deal back in the day. Not so much anymore because Blizzard, because fuck Blizzard, modern Blizzard. But this was a big deal when it first came out. Again, having Arceus being the main baddie again after we saw him in Warcraft 3, and him basically being resurrected or freed. Yeah, that was insane. And it also helps that if I'm gonna be honest, this cinematic trailer for this game, for this expansion, honestly, this might be shocking because I love talking shit about Blizzard, but keep in mind, this is 2000s Blizzard we're talking about. Honestly, that trailer was pretty damn impressive. And as far as a expansion goes, it's an MMO expansion, so of course it's going to have tons of content, including going into the Frozen Wastes. So yeah, this is definitely one that I had to add on. So, but enough gushing. Let's get to the winner, especially since we're almost done with this anyways. So, all right, so the award for the best expansion of 2008 goes to World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. I'm not gonna lie, this thing almost kind of got me into World of Warcraft. Okay, let me phrase that. I remember watching a lot of the cinematic trailers for World of Warcraft whenever I was a teenager, and that did almost get me into World of Warcraft. And truth be told, I still like the concept of Warcraft as a franchise. It's just the asterisks in the room being Blizzard. I just in good faith don't know if I feel comfortable playing World of Warcraft for you guys. Granted, I don't know if I would anyways, because I really don't want to, spend a lot of time on an MMO. But truth be told, World of Warcraft, I do think, does deserve a bit of recognition, especially for this expansion, which is regarded as the best expansion of the game. So, again, this was highly anticipated, and, well, like I said, being the best expansion, of course. And, of course, Arceus, or I think that's how you spell his name. Let me double check. Lich. Yeah, I mean, he's more so just kind of referred to as the Lich King. Or Arthas, excuse me, not Arceus, it's Arthas. So, yeah, the fact that he came back was a pretty damn big deal. And again, just the amount, yeah, just kind of expanding the world to, like, the frozen wastes. That was a pretty cool thing. Yeah, I forgot what were the races that were added into it. Cause yeah, I think there was like unless if I'm mistaking it. God damn it. Okay. I was confusing it with the other one. My bad. So, oh, it added the hero class. I'm sorry. God damn it. I'm sorry if this seems like I'm not doing my research. It's just, God. Okay. Yeah, it didn't add any new races, but it did add in it did add in the Death Knight class. So, which fair. If that's your playstyle, that's fine. But whatever, you get the point. Wrath of the Lich King, brought in some, it did bring in, pretty good boss fights, as far as you're concerned. And again, that frozen, the ice area looks pretty damn cool. Like, because again, World of Warcraft, I feel like, is more known for its sort of, general, typical high medieval fantasy look. So to have something that was a bit more of like a, sort of, I guess frozen evil sort of dead look was definitely a breath of fresh air for the game itself. Like, having those frozen like that was pretty cool. Whatever. I'm going to shut up now cuz like whatever. I think this is the best expansion to win. I rest my case. I'm not going to waste my time anymore. Let's move on to the next thing, which should be art direction, which of course was not a category for the original Game Awards because they didn't give a shit about that. But we give a shit about that now. So, what did I end up choosing? Well, all these I do think are very fair choices. Persona 4, of course, for its anime aesthetics, and of course being a Persona game taking place in, high school, so or like a college. So if that's your vibe, there you go. Braid, because of its 2D, it's not really a sprite, it's more 2D like hand drawn sort of look, and it's sort of almost painting look that is pretty interesting. Little Big Planet for its sort of paper mache puppet hybrid look. Spore for its sort of cartoony, space exploration, creature like design, and of course Red Alert 3 for its alternate World War 3 with like I guess sort of a a propaganda poster look for like obviously the game cover, but even like the game play look itself is very like visually like stylized. So I think these are fair choices, if you guys seen gameplay of any of those games, I don't think anyone's gonna deny that like those are, I'd say, the best choices for art direction for 2008, as far as I'm concerned, anyways. So, again, this is the most objective, award. So if you disagree with me, that is completely fine. But of course, let's get into this. So, the award for the best art direction of 2008 goes to Little Big Planet. So, yeah, I feel like this is definitely the game that I think should be the winner. Which, yeah, that's fair. It has like that sort of cardboard, paper mache puppet look that it, is very well known for it. And, I think it is a very unique look, especially for a game from that time. A lot of games, were definitely trying to be more, gamey. So to have a game try to simulate a more realistic look while still being cartoony was a pretty unique style. And, well, it helped complement the gameplay as this was a sandbox game, and so naturally, of course, it works out. So, good on the art team for making a boy who is a sack popular with the kids. That was a terrible joke. I'm gonna move on. Alright. Best narrative, best story. You guys know the drill. What do we got here? Because obviously the Game Awards did not have this as a category either. Well, I'd say these are probably the best choices, at least in my opinion, for best narrative. Devil May Cry 4, of course, continuing on the story of Dante, and just kind of, dealing with the bigger threats of that. GTA 4, of course, following Nico Belli in his, sort of grim, I guess you can say sort of grim, sort of, immigration to the United States and him having to, come out of hiding to go back into crime. Persona 4, of course. I mean, all the games take place in high schools and them having to fight, bigger baddies and do superhero stuff. I guess it just kind of depends on if you like the story or not. But there's an Arms Hell's Highway, just kind of for that camaraderie of our main characters, as, your main character starts dealing with stuff like PTSD, while also being able to, while dealing with the consequences of, your team's deaths. Excuse my language. And of course, Gears of War 2, just kind of on, Marcus's sort of, continuation of dealing with the existential threat of the Hive. So, yeah, I'd say these are definitely, the best choices for this category. And, yeah, but of course, let's get into the winner. So, the winner for the best narrative of 2008 goes to Grand Theft Auto 4. So, yeah, I'd say this is probably the one that a lot of people would choose. Even if you don't like GTA 4, you can at least appreciate what they were trying to go for when it comes to the story. So, yeah, Nico Belli, the man who can never get a goddamn break. Because, again, the whole point as to why he is going out of Eastern Europe is because he wants to, not deal with crime anymore. Problem is that, well, him being with his cousin eventually gets him into some crime. And, well, that gets into a huge thing I don't want to get into as far as spoilers, but you get the point. And I guess this game also has a lot of commentary on just the idea of just, criminal investigations, immigration, and unfortunately just kind of dealing with a lot of the issues that come with being someone new to the United States, which unfortunately still rings a bit home in a lot of ways. So, and that being said, though, Nico Bellic is still not a great person. As a matter of fact, dare I say, none of the characters in GTA 4 are like good people, like at all. And that's intentional. Because, well, this game's narrative easily takes inspiration from the popular show from the early 2000s, The Sopranos. So, which was a crime drama where everyone's a piece of shit in that game. And, it takes a lot of inspiration from that. But instead of being their perspective from like an Italian, gang family, this one is more Slavic. So, yeah, that's at least... I don't want to say the most interesting thing in the world, but definitely one that adds to a compelling narrative. And, well, there are two drastically different endings that happen in the game. Not necessarily good endings, but definitely good endings that are bittersweet, but not insulting at the same time. Choose wisely. Now we reach the game of the year. So, of course, this was a category that was at the Game Awards. So, naturally, of course, we've got this here. But what did they choose? I mean, I'd say this is a fair pick, except for Fallout 3. Again, you guys know I'm not the biggest Fallout fan, so that's definitely the one that I would not choose personally. But everything else, yeah, I'd say they're fair enough. Of course, GTA 4, for the reasons I mentioned with the narrative, as well as the fact that it has a pretty impressive open world. Metal Gear Solid 4 for its sort of, I guess, finalization of the Metal Gear story, and Snake kind of coming to terms with his condition by this late into the game, like into the franchise, and even still improving upon a lot of the combat systems of some of the previous games. Little Big Planet for its cool, wacky sort of art direction, combined with the other elements of sorry, I'm just thinking, like the custom level editor, and its sandbox design. And Gears of War 2 for being a pretty solid sequel to an already pretty damn good third-person shooter. So, fair pickings, I would say. But, of course, GTA 4 was the game that won that. But there can always be improvement. So, these are the games I'm going to choose for Game of the Year. And you know what? I think I'm going to add in one more. So, I think we can leave Little Big Planet on here. So, I think it was released sometime in between here. So, just to kind of fill it up to 6, because admittedly, yeah. But yeah, I think it should be pretty obvious why I decided to add Dead Space and Far Cry 2. Obviously, both those games I did play, but I do think that as far as survival horror and first-person shooter respectively, they do really good in their own lanes. And I do highly recommend you guys check out both of them for their respective categories. And I'm throwing a bone to Devil May Cry 4 here, because at the end of the day, admittedly, it's an extremely solid hack and slash game within the series that I feel like, wow, this is Devil May Cry 2 right there. Not Devil May Cry 2, 4. I just realized that. My god, I'm an idiot. But yeah, you get the point. Like, I would still say that it is an extremely solid game in its own right. And if you love Devil May Cry, obviously play 4 if you haven't. But there can only be one winner. So, here we go. This is the big award of the night. So, let's do it. So, here we go. The final award. So, here we go. The award for the Game of the Year for 2008 goes to... Far Cry 2. Yep. Far Cry DOS has won Game of the Year. Again, go watch my Let's Play series from last year that I have saved on the Twitch VODs to see exactly what I mean. This game is so damn fun. Its gameplay is extremely solid with guns that feel clunky but not like, unusable. And, well, of course, balanced out, of course, by the fact that they degrade over time, making you have to switch weapons over time. The location is one of the more unique in a shooter game. Yeah, there's some games that do have like a sub-Saharan Africa setting, but to have an entire game set there, you do not see that a lot. And I do find that it adds to the overall gameplay. This game has such beautiful detailing. Again, it is one of the most detailed games ever. Like, it is such a technological achievement, I would say, in a lot of ways. And unfortunately, we haven't really seen a lot of that since. And that is honestly a crime. Do more, again, those are small things, but those small things not only add up to such an immersive experience, but even like help manage with the gameplay. And so for me personally, I have to acknowledge that, yeah, Far Cry 2 is pretty solid in that. And even though I will admit the narrative isn't necessarily the strong point of the game, as a matter of fact, I'd say, as far as in-game stuff, it's definitely one of the weaker aspects. I still find Far Cry 2's sort of narrative beats and its main antagonist, the Jackal, to be some of the most interesting and underappreciated stuff ever. And, well, last but not least, this game, honestly, I would say, is one of the best just pieces of commentary about, the way in which a lot of wars do end up happening. Because this game, motif is that it's set in a civil war between two, African factions in an unnamed country that unfortunately was, propped up by someone who wanted to profit off of it. And, well, let's just say that there's a lot of real life parallels to that. So, also, I apologize for anything going on back there, but I just find that to be such a really good way for a lot of stories to I appreciate the way in which they have that set up, and I do find that they executed it masterfully. Go check out Far Cry 2 if you guys haven't. So, if there's anything to take away. Sorry. Alright, let's recap. So, of course, these are the awards that we ended up giving out. Best game by new studio went to Left 4 Dead. Best action adventure went to GTA 4. Best platform game went to Little Big Planet. Best role-playing game went to Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. Best shooter game went to Far Cry 2. Best sim strategy went to Spore. Best sports racing fighting went to Mario Kart Wii. Best multiplayer went to Call of Duty World at War. Best DLC expansion went to World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. Best art direction went to Little Big Planet. Best narrative went to GTA 4. And of course, Game of the Year went to Far Cry 2. So, as far as my personal favorites from 2008, got Metal Gear Solid 4, Star Wars Force Unleashed, Dead Space, Far Cry 2, Devil May Cry 4, Call of Duty World at War, GTA 4, Rainbow Six Vegas 2, Spore, and Mario Kart Wii. So, again, a lot of the same games. And I guess that just kind of proves, at least to me and to a lot of other people, that, yeah, 2008 wasn't really the greatest year in gaming. Like, there's worse years, but that is a damn shame. Though, there are some honorable mentions and admittedly some guilty pleasures that I did want to give a bit of a shout out. Mostly because, well, maybe they're categories I wasn't able to, like, fit in, or they aren't particularly, like, great games that I wouldn't have nominated. So, let's give them the shout out. Frontline Fields of War is a shooter game released by Chaos Studios, I believe. It had a decent Battlefield-like multiplayer, and its campaign was fine. I just kind of like the aesthetics of it. And I mean, that guy looks like he's a discount to Ghost Recon member, but I digress. Yes, this was also the year of Condemned 2 Bloodshot, which got very overlooked, along with Siren Blood Curse, another solid horror game, and Fatal Frame, Master of the Lunar Eclipse. All three of those, unfortunately, got pretty forgotten. So, I wanted to give all those a shout out. Mercenaries 2. Yeah, it's not as good as the first Mercenaries. It does have massive problems. But I still appreciate the, quasi open world of, I think it was Latin America that they tried going for. And I don't know, it's still pretty cool in some respects. Of course, Rock Band 2 and Guitar Hero World Tour. Again, I don't know, like, where I would have put them on the thing anyways, so as far as I'm concerned, yeah, I'd rather just kind of just say those are more guilty pleasures. Saints Row 2, it is considered by many to be the best Saints Row. I guess I just need to get into Saints Row more, because yeah, it's just, I guess I just put this as like an honorable mention just for the sake of the fact that, like, yeah, there weren't really enough games to fill up the action adventure slot. So, there you go. Same thing with Tomb Raider Underworld, actually. I do think that Tomb Raider Underworld is pretty good in its own right, and I wanted to give it a nod. And then we've got 3 games that aren't not necessarily like childhood games, but like, or at least, well, 2 of them aren't, but I just kind of remember seeing a lot. I'm gonna give an honorable nod, funny enough, to the Kung Fu Panda movie game. Yes, movie license games usually are terrible, but I'm gonna give this one a bit of an exceptional nod, because this one was surprisingly decent. Not amazing, not great, dare I say this would never be nominated, but it was better than you would think. It's a good, Devil May Cry clone, funny enough. So, if that also, Poe does do the Thunder Flop. How dare you steal that from Murray? So, I also wanted to give a nod to Legend of Spyro Dawn of the Dragon. Yes, This is a part of the Legend of Spyro trilogy that people were not particularly keen on. Fair enough, especially with those first 2 games. But I would say that Dawn of the Dragon is a solid enough action-adventure beat-em-up within the Spyro mythos. That, yeah, no, like, I would say, if you haven't, see if you can find a copy. So, and then last but not least, we've got a game that does mean a lot to the channel, Wizard 101. So, I would have nominated this, but in good faith, and because I seen reviews, it just unfortunately didn't have a high enough score from users for me to be able to like feel comfortable nominating it. Because this game did have quite a few it didn't even like it had a few like decent reviews, but it didn't have a lot of critic reviews. So yeah, I just don't know if I don't know. That being said though, Wizard 101 still does mean a lot to me, as it was the first game that got me on to play PC gaming. So without it, who knows if I would be playing other PC games. So I wanted to give it a bit of a shout out. So, because admittedly, it did kind of get forgotten in the wave of MMOs from around that time. But regardless, I'm also hearing copyrighted music from back there, so I don't know if the mic is picking me up, so I'm gonna have to do this quick. So that's 2008. Yeah, not the best year for video games by a long shot, but trust me when I say this, 2007 is gonna be a much better year to talk about. Though I am going to have to stream that one on Sunday, like next Sunday as well, because I will be busy on Saturday. So I do apologize for that. Rest assured, starting, next Saturday, not this upcoming one, but next Saturday, we'll be back to the normal schedule as far as us doing the streams on Saturdays. I hope you guys don't mind that. And I hope you guys did enjoy this. If you guys did, make sure to hit that follow button down below and turn the bell icon if you guys want to be notified. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon over there as well. While you guys are at it, make sure to check out the links down below as well, specifically Discord, SoundCloud, YouTube, and the Humble Bundle affiliation link. If you want to directly support me on Twitch, hit that subscribe button. If you can't do that, that's completely fine. I'm just glad that you guys kind of took your time to watch this. But regardless of all that, though, make sure to share the stream to other people as well, and continue to be awesome people. But until then, I'll see you guys on the next one. Have a good night, and peace out. Oh, shoot. Yeah, peace out. Bye.